think when we think of disordered eating, or at least when I see it in my practice, it's often restriction or purging or binging or diet pills. And then we think about, okay, let's get this person to feel better about themselves, right? Really simplistic, right? And then, reintroduce food, but it's so much more complicated than that, it seems. There's so much science behind it. There's so much about this. I'm hearing like the gut biome and all these tests that we have to do. It's not just about our relationship with food, it sounds like, but it's also about a whole body experience. That's what I'm hearing what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we want that mind-body connection. And that's hard to do when your gut's off.
This is Dr. Laura. Welcome to Mind Candy Podcast, where we empower women's voices and tackle current issues related to psychology. All right, everyone, welcome back to Mind Candy Podcast. This is Dr. Laura. Today, we're going to be talking about body image and nutrition and social media, and I'm so grateful that I have a wonderful guest today. I'd like to introduce you to Julie Cole. She's a registered dietitian, and I'd love for you guys to get to know her today. And we're going to be talking about some really awesome, important stuff that women deal with their body image and food intake and social media and all things confidence. So, Julie, I'd love to have you introduce yourself to my listeners. Take it away.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Julie Cole, as Laura mentioned, and I run J. Cole Nutrition. And I've also just started a new Instagram called the Hippie Dietitian, where I'm going to be exploring even more women's health and maybe even some herbalism in there too. So
I love that. So, what led you to, begin a career in, women's health and working with people who may have questions about nutrition, need help with nutrition, and disordered eating?
really, my love for food kind of brought me to here. So I just followed what lit me up in my life. And so when I was in college, I thought this is stupid because I don't know what I want to do. And then I don't even know, learning about cooking, I guess. I decided I wanted to go to culinary school. And so I said, okay, let me get out of here. So I changed my degree of family, youth, and community services, which is like a social psychology, which still, you realize now, minored in nutrition. And then I went to culinary school, and I went because I wanted to teach people how to cook. It wasn't like I want to own my own restaurant. But from there, I went and worked at this place in Tampa, and I did recipe development. And I always was given the like nutrition people, because I minored in it, to modify our menus for X, Y, or Z. I was like, well, this is kind of fun. So then I decided to go back and get my degree in dietetics. And then in my internship, I was, had to pick places to intern, and I picked a treatment center for my elective rotation. And I just leaned into it. They were like, hey, the clients really respond to you. Do you want to do more? And so during my internship, I started teaching cooking classes there. And then when I graduated my internship, they were like, do you want to work here? And I was like, okay. And so I kind of fell into eating disorders, but that's where I did learn about body image, because I mentioned Vivian, she unfortunately had a sick mother at the time, and she was gone a lot. So that it was like, here, you do the body image stuff. And I think that it taught me this like holistic aspect of treatment, where it's, let me look at this person and really see what's going on here. Because as much as I do a lot of like quote unquote counseling, it's a lot of clinical work, but it also was my own journey throughout health. Because as I mentioned, I had dealt with some health struggles. And I think that trying to help myself taught me, hey, like not every practitioner is going to hear me. I have to figure some things out. I have to trust my body, right? What my body is trying to tell me. And I think that's the part, is that when women would come in and say, I don't feel good, I was like, well, I don't want you to feel like this. Like this investigator part of my brain was like, let's figure this out. And so I would just figure it out with them. Right. I wasn't the doctor. I was just someone that was helping them investigate their symptoms. And it led me to learn more. And then that just really inspired me, and, be able to help them. I mean, I love when clients come in and they have like a list of questions. They're like, I know this might not be you, but you know a lot. So you might know where I go for this. And I usually do. I'm like, well, yeah, I know a guy.
I know. It's so important too, like even if it's not our specialty, I think that's why it's so amazing to continue to stay connected with these other awesome clinicians and providers, because then we can really direct people in the right direction and go, hey, like I don't do this, but I know somebody, I know a gal, right?
Right. Well, and even today, I do like a Marco with a couple clinicians I work with, and we're chatting. I said, "Oh, I'm going on this podcast," and explain who you were. And I was like, "Yeah, and she's great." So, one is a psychiatric nurse practitioner, one is a therapist. I was like, "If we ever have a client that needs some trauma work, like, I know gal."
Totally vetted, used to work with her, right?
Love her. She's amazing. So
Ditto. I'm curious, because we're, this whole, podcast thing that I'm doing, is someone who's amazing with technology. You know me, if you know me, you know that joke. Um, SOS. Awesome. So yes, well, so at the end of this episode, we're also going to discuss resources, and as always, attached to this episode, you'll be able to find Julie's website, her Instagram handles, all those things, because I'm sure all of you are going to want to explore more with the information she's going to be giving us today. So let's start out. Julie, I know before we started recording here, we were talking about our pets, and I know you have a few. What kind of pets do you have? I love asking people this. It's an important question.
It is. I'm dog sitting today, so I have an extra one. My mom's French bulldog, but I personally have a mastiff. She's a South African mastiff named Moab.
Oh,
Her Mo. She's a big emotional girl.
no.
She's 2.5, and then I have gotten my first cat.
Oh,
So
wow.
her name is Olive, and sometimes Sailor Moon. It depends on our mood.
I
She
love
is
that.
she's a sassy little one. She's only like 6 pounds. She's the tiniest thing I've ever seen. For a cat, she's a year old. Recently, she climbed a tree. She's outside mostly, and she climbed a 40-foot pine tree, and the fire department had to come.
Oh,
So it
wow.
was really an adventure. I was like, "This isn't real. This is TV." And I like call. I'm like, "What do I do?" She was up there for 12
Like a
hours.
cartoon, right? Like
Yeah.
what happens with the cartoons. Well, she got out of the tree and you got some firefighters, so everyone won that day.
And then I took them donuts. Yeah.
Amazing. I love that. So I would love for you to kind of just tell our listeners today, what you do with work. Like what are some things you focus on? I know that the two things you're really passionate about, among other things, are women's health and working with women who have been diagnosed or may be diagnosed with eating disorders or disordered eating.
Yeah, so I've been in practice for about probably 15 years. My private practice for about 6, and so we do focus on eating disorders, disordered eating, whether or not someone's diagnosed. And then with women's health, because eating disorders, there's a lot of nutritional things that we can do in the realm of holistic functional nutrition, as they call it. And I think it hadn't always been accessible to women in that demographic because it was quote unquote disordered, and those practitioners were very extreme. So in my practice, we've been able to add some flexibility and do things because when you're malnourished of any type, so undernourished, you're going to have gut issues. It just goes hand in hand. So we started doing like stool testing, GI, what they call GI maps, and even we do some hormonal testing, micronutrient testing, and I found that it just really helps. But with that, we've then expanded into just women's health because there are people that don't have an eating disorder or disordered eating, but still have gut issues or mineral deficiencies. And so we're able to also work with those clients and just provide more care. But I think in a way that continues to have flexibility and care around the way that we speak so that it doesn't become this black and white, so that there's not this pressure of this perfectionism of health. I think that we get a little too focused on constantly healing ourselves and not taking time for the rest. And so that part is also important for our practice, and I think my team and I do a great job of, again, including those different disciplines along with what we do with body image and it just healing people's relationship with food. We want people to be able to enjoy food again, right? That's the goal.
It sounds very holistic, not just focusing on, I think when we think of disordered eating, or at least when I see it in my practice, it's often restriction or purging or binging or diet pills. And then we think about, okay, let's get this person to feel better about themselves, right? Really simplistic, right? And then, reintroduce food, but it's so much more complicated than that, it seems. There's so much science behind it. There's so much about this. I'm hearing like the gut biome and all these tests that we have to do. It's not just about our relationship with food, it sounds like, but it's also about a whole body experience. That's what I'm hearing what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we want that mind body connection. And that's hard to do when your gut's off, right? Or when your hormones are off. And so, I think a lot of, unfortunately, our healthcare works in those silos and very individual. And so we try to kind of incorporate everything together. And even like recently, well, 2 years ago, I got my Reiki certification. So now I'm a Reiki master. And so I even bring that into my practice. I do human design, which I explain on another podcast if you like, but it's kind of like this blueprint of how your brain works and understanding, getting the right coping skills for you. Because, right, I give that job to the therapist, but sometimes I have to talk about it because we're talking about food. And, in the realm of eating disorders, there's this saying that all foods fit. And really, they don't. And I say that with care because they all can emotionally fit. But when we really think about people's health, like not everyone is going to have optimal health. There are people that have Crohn's, there are people that have rheumatoid arthritis, or diabetes, like when people come in with a comorbidity, we can't just say, okay, eat all foods, right? I mean, we want them to because we want to work through that negative relationship, that negative association that, oh, I can't eat X, Y, and Z. These foods are quote unquote unhealthy. And so in the grand scheme of things, all foods emotionally can fit. We don't have to have this fear around them. And I think that's what we try to emphasize in our practice. And then we want you to find the foods that you feel best eating, because the basis of our practice is intuitive eating. And that includes connecting to what foods feel good in your body and using your intuition, and also being intentional with it, right? It's not just about, oh, this is what sounds good, and only eating when you're hungry. And I think that's the like quick and dirty version of what intuitive eating can be. But really, it's, I have a meeting with Laura today, so let me make sure I eat before, right? Because if I don't, then I'm gonna be hungry halfway through, and then my stomach will be growling as we're talking. And so it's being more intentional. If I didn't feel hungry, I know I would have been. And I think that's the part that we have to pay more attention, but we live in such a fast-paced world. And I know, I'm sure you deal with this with your clients too, of just trying to get people to be present and slow down a little. And I think that that's difficult because your mind is in the future, in the past, and we're worried about the mental load in our brain.
Constantly going, going, going. Before we started recording today, it was interesting. Our listeners may not know this. If you know me, you know this, but you and I used to work together at Florida Gulf Coast University. And I don't actually know if you know this. This may be a new piece of information for you mid-podcast, but when we were working together, you may recall I was pregnant with my daughter, and I developed what my doctors found out to be Crohn's, and I got diagnosed after. And so I worked with, and I'm saying this to really kind of spread awareness of Crohn's. And also, as you mentioned, and I'm like, oh, wow, maybe I should include this. It's a really wild disease. And I've worked with a dietitian. So if any of my girlies out there that have also are dealing with Crohn's or also working with a dietitian, registered dietitian, it's wild. And yes, not all foods are okay. Right. And you
Right.
find that out pretty quickly. And it's not just like, oh, my tummy hurts. It's like way more than that. So it's a very like full body process. And so speaking as someone who has clients come in and, that have a lot of body image, have a lot of questions about how to eat right, how to treat our bodies properly. And then as someone who's living with Crohn's myself, it can be a really complicated, I think, speaking for myself, it can feel very complicated and scary to get started with, this new relationship with body image, new relationship with food. And I'm curious, what advice or pointers would you have for women today who may have body image concerns or questions about where to start to get help? Because I feel like that could be really confusing for a lot of people.
It definitely can be. And I think traditionally dietitians aren't in the body image realm. I had this great mentor when I first started, Vivian, that she was a body image therapist, and she taught me so much about body image. But to your point about a chronic illness, when you're dealing with pain can cause such severe body image, negative body image, because we are so mad at our bodies, right? We're physically in pain, whether that is, chronic pain because of an injury or because of Crohn's. Like, I'm afraid to eat this food, because I don't know what it's going to do to the insides of my body. And then that translates into, I hate my body. And I personally also have dealt with health issues and chronic pain. And I remember experiencing this like body image stuff. And I was like, what is going on? And so, I think therapists that specialize in body image, dietitians that specialize in body image, because it is all connected, and getting a team to work together. There are great body image workbooks out there as well. And I can give you some to tag to this. I can't think of the names offhand, but those can be triggering too. The idea of body image is really like fake, like what, like, right? It's this concept that has been made because our society says we should look a certain way, right? We don't come out of the womb going, oh my gosh, I'm such a chubby baby. We learn that these things aren't good, and we learn to distrust and dislike our bodies because it is the easiest thing. And as a reformed people pleaser, I know that too, right? Because it's way easier to be hard on yourself because you want to please everyone else. And so the complexities of what body image is, and because it is just our perception, it is our perception of self. So when we look in the mirror, what we're really looking at is how we feel about ourselves that day. And this is why too, you can look at a photo from 5 years ago and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I hated that photo at the time. Right. And then 2 days later, you might go, I really hate that photo, because emotionally you're in a different state.
Yeah.
And so I always go, well, think about someone you had a crush on at some point in your life, right? And you thought this person was real cute, and maybe you dated them a little bit, maybe not, whatever. But then at some point they were kind of a jerk. And you go, oh my gosh, they weren't even that cute, right? They didn't change.
We can all relate to that.
Right? They didn't change of what they looked like. It's that your feelings towards them changed, and you were like, oh, maybe they're not so cute. But objectively, like nothing, right? And so that's, so turn that on yourself. Like objectively, nothing has changed, but we start to pick on these different things. Like, and then, let's say you're looking for cars and you start thinking about a red, Volkswagen. Well, now you're going to see a gazillion red Volkswagens, right? The same thing when you're thinking about your body. If you notice something, if there's a trend going on of, what the newest trend is, it used to be eyebrows. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's still eyebrows.
It's hard to keep up.
It's hard to keep up, but then now you're looking at everybody's eyebrows, right? And you're like, well, now mine don't look like that. And this comparison game starts to happen. And this is all really objectification. We're taught to objectify instead of really looking at someone in the inside. And again, with ourselves, we don't look in deeply. And sometimes when we do, we see things we don't like. And I think that is where, right, therapy can come in and even in my practice, when we're working with somebody, I'm like, if something comes up, it's like, all right, this is what I want you to talk with your therapist about, right? Because I can only take it so far, but that internal work that everything really comes down to.
I think it's so important, about the whole holistic care, right? I'm not a, disordered eating or nutrition specialist, right? I'm a clinical psychologist. I work a lot with trauma and identity, all the fun stuff you can see on my website. Or if you work with me, but I think it's so important to connect with other professionals, right? And know where to guide our clients or people that we know that may have these questions. And it's okay for us all to not have all the answers. We can't, right? Like jack of all trades, master of none, right? But I think it's so important when we're tackling these whole body, whole mind issues, it's important to approach it from several perspectives, from a nutrition perspective, from a women's health perspective, from a psychological therapy perspective, right? Making sure that people are going to their GP and like ruling out thyroid stuff and, medication, medical based problems that are probably aggravating all of the above. And so I think it's so important to not just do one thing and then stop, but it's almost like it's like a journey of self-healing that goes in a lot of different directions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just can be so frustrating. I know for my clients that go to their practitioners and they're like, I don't feel good. Something's wrong. And then they're like, your lab work looks great.
Right. Like, wow.
I mean, I think I get an email a day about this or a text from a client, whether they're even my current client or not. They might be somebody else. I got an email yesterday. I was like, hey, how did it go? I emailed her saying she was going to a new doctor. And I was like, how'd it go with the new doctor? She's like, I actually left today. And I was like, oh, okay. But thankfully it was a doctor that is more holistic. And so advocating for yourself and that confidence of being able to advocate for yourself, I think is important. Because even in my realm, it's like, well, you need a blind weight. Which is a way where you don't see it. And that's really hard with the portals and weights being everywhere. You log in and you can see it and you can whole history of your weight history if you wanted to. And
Yeah,
so,
they make charts of it. I know.
yes,
Like, oh, cool.
exactly. And so like being able to voice that, hey, that does not work for me. This is where I'm at with my mental health. If you really need my weight, you can get it, but you cannot put it in the chart because I'm going to see it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think some doctors will be okay with that, and others will kind of be like, well, this is something you need to be aware of, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just constantly educating. It's hard because like, I'm like, it's not your job as like for my clients, education to these practitioners. But if you're not my client, like, you kind of have to do it for yourself. But I think that's where like having a good therapist to work on your self-worth and be able to vocalize that because
Mhm.
it is difficult. And when if you're not in the medical field to begin with, and then you're trying to advocate for yourself, but definitely it's important to, yes, rule things out, make sure that, we're focusing on the right thing, right?
Absolutely. Julie, I would also love for you to kind of tell our listeners a little bit about you. I know that, you're very active. You're active in the garden. You love doing, yoga, things like that. I'm curious, like, what are some fun facts about you that you love to do? Maybe it'll inspire some of our listeners to kind of engage in some new activities.
Well, I've recently gotten into gardening. I forget who it is that I follow, but there was something about like chaotic gardening where you just like garden. And I'm like, that is me. I'm gonna try that. Because I love flowers, and I see all these people doing like the plant stuff and the plant please, and I love, and one of my best friends is the green thumb fairy. Like I love it, but I'm like, I'm a flower girl, so that's been a fun new thing to just kind of explore. I love doing yoga. I've been doing it for, I guess, over 20 years now. It's just a great practice. I've recently got into meditation, and that's been great. I always thought meditation is too hard because you have to clear your brain, and I've learned that that's not how it works.
It can be, right? But it's not always how it works.
Not. And then a few years ago, I got into paddleboarding because I'm down here in Southwest Florida and just wanted to do something out in the water. I to get terrified still of the alligators and sharks, depending where I am, but I usually have a friend with me that's keep going. So,
That sounds so fun. I
and I
know
love it.
with me, plants, I have those self-watering plants, and I always say that I have a few girlfriends who are like have very big, wonderful green thumbs, and I always say plants are where they go to die. I'm like a plant murderer. I'm trying really hard. I try every day to water them in my office and at my home, but
Maybe you're
it's a
overwatering.
maybe. Yeah, I got the app where you can kind of like, take a photo and it tells you like what they need and it just kind of glitches. So I think
Oh.
I need to get an expert in to help me because I'm like, how am I hurting a self-watering plant? But TBD. I'm curious with this whole social media thing. What do you think is the most damaging aspect of social media with our connection with our bodies, nutrition, our health? I know you have a lot of thoughts on this.
do. I do. Well, it's always been, right? It's images. We're this image-based society, and like, the first diet came out in like 1912 by Dr. Lulu Hunt Peters, and it was, a key to calories, and it was a 1,200 calorie diet, which is what we see now, which, to be clear, is enough for a toddler. And you like that is not enough food for an adult woman or man, and would actually be considered starvation. Really, so this has been going on for a long time, and it was the marketing then was to look like a starlet, and now everyone is online and we are seeing quote unquote normal people, but we're not. And so I think that this whole AI stuff, the filters, the face tune, whatever body tune stuff, that all has a huge impact. And then surgeries, we're not seeing real things. And then we can get into the diet industry too of the Ozempic. And again, we're not seeing real things. We're seeing glimpses of people, and this is what I do. And we're not considering genetics either. If you're naturally in a smaller body, then that's what you're going to look like no matter what. And then also, if you in your 20s, because you're not, it's not the same as being in your 30s, right? So like to say like this is what I do and it's going to work for you, like that's not how it works. So I think that the credentialing of people, so the influencers that are speaking from their own experiences, like I share about my experience, but I don't share this is what you should do because of what I learned a lot going through that experience, and I'm able to then explore more and go into those things because of it. but it was not like, do what I did. And I think that's the messaging that we see, but it's really hard when you're constantly getting bombarded with images and that comparison happens. So we see the studies, eating disorders rose as social media rose. COVID, I mean, eating disorders tripled during COVID. The 5 years prior, they only doubled in 5 years, just to put that in perspective. So in 1 year, they tripled. And this, I don't think people realize how severe eating disorders are, disordered eating and body image. Every 52 minutes, someone dies from an eating disorder, which is insane, right? It's more prevalent than breast cancer. And yet it's not talked about because we live in this diet culture world where being thin is the, being of health and the goal, right? Yeah. So I think my issue with social media is that it is a lot of times fake. It is a lot of image based. It's not about soul connection. I do see it depends who you follow. I mean, I don't follow people that are like that. And I get a great experience for being on social media, mostly a lot of good recipes and some chaotic gardening. But it's catering it to like what is it you want to see. But I think this idea that everyone can be famous too, right?
Yes, but the goal to be famous, right? Or to
Mm.
follow the Hollywood starlight. Like I'm thinking right now just randomly like of who I love, like her work, Jennifer Aniston. Like she's amazing, but people are so obsessed with like the salads that she eats, right? And I mean, I'm sure all of us listen, everyone listening, you and I can very much think of several examples, right? Many of these women that we look to, like I'm thinking of like Jennifer Lopez. She's beautiful, but her full-time job is to create art, right? With singing and movies and everything. But her job is to like be fit, to have all these things that are access to her. Those are not our jobs, right? That would be kind of cool. But
No, genetically, that's great. That's what she looks like. I mean, so there's that big component as well. And yes, like she pays people probably to come and train her and cook her food, or she has the luxury of time and money to do that for herself.
which I'm not taking away her hard work because like clearly these women work their butts off, right? And they're very hardworking, super accomplished, super, incredibly talented people. So definitely not taking away from that, but just I think as everyday gals, right, we look at these women and go, oh my gosh, I need to aspire to do that. In which, everybody has a different body. And we all have different lives and jobs and priorities. And I think, evening out that playing field and reconnecting to who we are and what our priorities are. It doesn't have to be doom scrolling through social media and, being like, oh, why don't I look like this? Right.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean we don't improve. It doesn't mean we don't have, we don't better ourselves. But I feel like evening out that playing field for ourselves is a big deal for a lot of women that I know and myself included. I'll call myself out with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, we think that's what we have to achieve, right? The American dream of keeping up with the Joneses of I have to have more of
Mhm.
this, more of that.
Absolutely.
And it's not just materials, it's now bodies. And I think the new area of like biohacking, which is this idea that we can live forever. And I think there's great information, but it goes back to what works best for you, like cold plunges, great for some people, not everyone, right? Infrared sauna, same thing. And then you also have to pay attention to your mineral status, which would be like sodium, potassium. So if you're doing these things, then
Mhm.
how is that impacting your body? Is it creating more stress, less stress? I think all these things are amazing because we're learning so much and we have to be realistic because if you're trying to do all that in one day and like go to work,
Right.
care for your kids if you have them or your fur babies, it's a lot. Like it's a lot to do.
It is, and I think that this idea of perfect health can be really damaging for a lot of people. This unattainable, thing. I know a lot of these tech billionaires I'm looking at and read about, like they do all these things, they go in cryo chambers, they do all these things, and it's just, yeah,
Take 100%.
not to bring us down another rabbit hole today, but it's something to consider, right? It's I think what we're talking about today, one is making sure you have a team of people behind you, or at least you're getting a lot of different perspectives. And then two is, focusing on just being in your body and appreciating your body. And yes, right, there's always going to be things that we don't like, but processing through educating yourself about what is good nutrition, right? What is the science behind that beyond the image, I think, is so important for women to be curious about our bodies instead of just immediately being so cruel to ourselves is something that I see a lot in therapy.
I don't think you always have to hate something about your body. I really, truly don't. I think that gratitude is the key there. We could just be grateful, as you said, for our bodies. Like this is the only one we get, right? There's no spare parts.
Yeah.
And so we have to take good care of it. We don't have to take perfect care of it because we also have to enjoy life. It's that balance of, like this week, I a lot of times I go in the morning outside of my yard, I listen to the birds, I drink some cacao or, and ground or whatever it is. And I meditate. I enjoy doing that. This week, like life was life and I didn't do those things. And I even got on my social media and I was just like, yeah, this week, this is what's happening. I'm not doing it in the same way. I'm still taking time for myself. And I'm also saying, hey, it's okay. Right? This week looked different and I'm not mad at myself. I'm not like, oh, I have to get back to it. I know that I'm just going to keep living and then I'll get back to whatever it is that makes me feel good. And again, I'm doing little things. I think this idea that it has to look a certain way, that even moving our body. I was talking to a client last night and he was like, I really don't like, I do have some male clients working out. It feels like I'm focused on calories and I'm focused on my body. But he found a sport that he loves doing. And he's like, it's just
Right.
fun.
It's not a task and chore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Same thing for yoga for me. Like it is just, it's community.
Mm-hmm.
I'm connecting with other women,
Yeah.
typically, sometimes men. There's this spirituality to it. And then I get to move my body in ways that feel good. It's never felt like a workout. I actually really don't like the yoga studios that are more of a, CrossFit yoga craziness or that are body focused. I get really annoyed I won't go to a teacher. If I hear something that, oh, I don't want to, hear people's feet drag. Well, yeah, you know what? Not all bodies can do that. So goodbye. I won't go again because I'm not going to support someone that speaks to a room full of humans that way.
Yeah.
Right. So we get to have that decision and it gets to be joyful, but it's just fine. I think people get defeated. Like, well, that's how they all are. And it doesn't.
I totally agree. I talk a lot in my work with my clients, especially female clients, about taking every day to just recalibrate, reset. And yesterday is not going to look the same as today, and tomorrow is going to look different too. And so instead of that becoming really overwhelming and scary, it's an opportunity to kind of reset. And I think that's kind of a beautiful thing to think about with our health, with if we have any body image concerns, if there's maybe some eating habits we need to get some help with. I think it's really important.
This is why I love women's health too, because unfortunately, most research was done on, not unfortunately, but most research was done on men, white men, right? And so when we think about these things that are put out there, that every day we should have this routine, we should do this, and, wake up, that is for men. Men are in a 24-hour hormonal cycle. Women are in a 28-day hormonal cycle. And so we think about that, like day one of your cycle, when your menstrual cycle starts, if you're still menstruating, is the same as day one, right? Day 1 to blah, 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 to 28 are not the same. So every day is going to look different. Your hormones are different every day. And even when we go through menopause, we still have these different ways our body works. It's not like men. So even bringing that aspect, that right biological aspect, that every day is not going to look the same because we are not the same.
Whether we want to be or not, right? A lot of it's out of our control. And so
Yeah.
figuring out what we can control, right, the best we can, and be kind to ourselves, and then maybe get educated on, like for instance, like I didn't know that what you just said to me. I didn't know for as many doctors as I go to, right? I did not know that thing. So it's so important to just be like, okay, we're not going to know everything, and just every day maybe learning something new, trying something new is so important. Julie, thank you so much for your time today. I'm so excited for my listeners to hear this and to start, hopefully this, and I think this will spark a lot of people's journey of how to, think of ourselves differently, to be curious, to have these questions about our mind and our body, and start a journey to help support them in a better way. I hope to have you back again.
I would love to come back. Thank you so much for having me.
We have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, good to see you too.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, this is Dr. Laura with Mind Candy Podcast, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Hey everyone, it's Dr. Laura with Mind Candy. A quick note just to discuss, as I am an ethical gal, ethical psychologist, none of these subjects or the information in the podcast constitute any kind of therapeutic relationship. All of that information can be found in our terms and conditions. Everything we discuss on Mind Candy are the experience of myself and my guests, and it does not constitute advice or a therapeutic relationship. Thank you so much, and don't forget to hit subscribe.